Hi, my name is Clarence Hill, and I want to thank you for inviting me to be a part of the Joining Forces Conference to get to speak into this idea that I love about bringing people together and about hope. I think our solution is right up this lane, and I think this is where we're going to get to see some of the greatest successes that we've ever seen. And it may not be so much as on a large scale, but in convening spaces like these where we cause these ideas to go farther, of us working together, of us seeing ideas come together and partnerships created and unity happen, especially in a time and in a space where we've seen so much contention and so much division. Thank you, Oklahoma Family Network, for what you're doing. I love the vision. For those that don't know me, I lead the Stronger Together movement. I'm also the creator of the Dream Clock. And the Dream Clock is a step-by-step guide that leads us into working together collaboratively across wealth gaps and across racial lines. So in a little bit, I want to share with you the first 5 steps that I think are just vital. But before I do that, I want to share one of our guiding thoughts behind our Stronger Together movement. That is all summed up in an equation that goes like this: shared values plus shared vision equals shared victory. I love the idea of shared values. We've had the privilege of hosting several conferences where we bring people together who are not from the same communities. They also represent different wealth classes and different political ideas also. We've been able to bring them together at the table to share stories and to connect around one simple idea, that we believe that the majority of us have shared values. I have an easy time connecting with people because I simply say, do you care about children? That's one of my driving values, is that I care about children, and I also care about people groups who can scream as loud as they want to, or who have given up hope and they still feel unheard and overlooked. When I put my values out there, I give someone else the opportunity to say, hey, that's me too. I want to jump in. And one of the greatest examples, and one of the great recent examples that I can share on this idea, is what Secretary Justin Brown has done in DHS by creating the Council of Voices. It's just a wonderful idea. The Council of Voices is a group of community leaders who represent different ethnic groups, and we represent some overlooked people groups with disabilities and things like that. And this group has been gathered together to speak into different efforts and into the different arms of DHS, who serves over 1 million Oklahomans in a single year. And I just think that's amazing, and that's exactly what I believe is part of the great solution to take us from where we are and to bring us into tomorrow. Shared values is an opportunity. It's an open door. And just as me sharing my notes to you, sticking with values is a gathering opportunity. Sticking with values gives people the opportunity to work together with groups that otherwise they might stiff arm because of narratives that actually would drive us apart. We all know that in a lot of the conversations that have come up over the last year, they're really politically driven. And wow, if there's an area where there's a lot of division and a lot of disagreement, it's around the area of politics. Well, I think equally on the other side is there's a driving opportunity for people of compassion, people who simply say 2 words, I care or we care. That group is able to find one another and come together and work together when they drive with their values. So that's what I encourage everyone to do. Drive with your values, because there are people who want to see things work out better, who care more about compassion than anything else, and that by driving with our values, we're able to create spaces for people to come together. Another thing that I think about this shared values and shared vision equation is moving closer towards the idea of vision. Vision is looking out there and coming up with this plan as to how are we going to get there. Well, what's great about creating tables and bringing us together is that we begin to have more information on what it's going to cost us, not just financially, but what is it going to cost us to carry a hope like this. You know, I think the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King is a legacy that can teach us so many things. And of course, if you use the word dream, you instantly think about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. On August 28, 1963, he had the courage, by the influence of one of his friends, to share his dream with all of the United States of America. And as he stood on the Lincoln Memorial, we all know his infamous speech, but I love remembering some of the specific things that he said, because it's one thing to dream, but it's another thing to know it's so necessary in the conversation of hope to know how to celebrate progress. I've actually learned that celebrating 10% progress is sometimes way better than condemning 90% of failure. So the dream that King set out, one of the quotes went like this. He said, "I have a dream that the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will one day sit down together at the table of brotherhood." I mean, I've been able to experience that myself, but at his time, that was a dream. I mean, that was lofty, that was way out there. Now I know we still have work to do, but again, hope is so driven by the ability to celebrate progress. And not only do we need to celebrate progress to keep hope, but it also gives us a real measure of where are we right now, unless we, act like, hey, we haven't made any progress at all and we just drain the hope that we have. Well, we've made progress, but there's a lot more to do, but let's at least celebrate what we have. Another piece of his dream that he shared I love was that he made it personal. He said, "I dream that my 4 children will one day be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." I love that the dream was personal, and that's what a dream has to be sometimes. There has to be, sometimes a personal piece of it because, in these compassion organizations, we sacrifice a lot. And I love that vision. It was something that he owned for himself. And there's one more piece of the dream I want to share with you, and that's when he said, "I'm dreaming about Alabama." Now, my wife's from Alabama, and the Deep South is different than even Oklahoma. And the narratives that you hear from the older generation of blacks and African Americans in the Deep South is a little different even than here. But even with that, the courage and the boldness to dream is still everything. And it helps us to say, I am really willing to believe that this path can make a difference. And by him mentioning Alabama, let me just give some context to this. Birmingham, Alabama was actually known as Bombingham. At that time, the justice system was not on the side of blacks, and many homes were being blown up, and no one was hardly being indicted at all. And so it was called Bombingham because of all of the violence that was taking place. And as a part of Martin Luther King's dream, he mentioned Alabama because that was one of the most impossible places where this dream could become a reality. I want to ask you, how strong are you dreaming? I want to encourage you, be willing to dream even in the places where it seems so hard. And that's why I love this conference, because I believe one of the great parts of us getting to that tomorrow that we all believe and we actually know that we can reach, where we work together, where there's representation, where there are voices that speak into the idea, so it's not just an idea that helps one group flourish and it ignores the needs of another group. We believe that going after impossible dreams is a part of this story. I encourage you to dream big enough so that you can say, hey, I'm going after this thing just like Dr. Martin Luther King did. What's your Alabama? What's your impossible space? Now, let's dream together in those spaces. Well, that leads me to talk a little bit about the dream clock. And I want to take you just briefly through some of the high points of the first 5 hours. There are 12 steps, 12 hours to the dream clock. Every single one of them has, according to the feedback we've received, they help people really grasp a vision of what does it take for us to cross this bridge, especially around the race conversation. I'm based out of Norman, Oklahoma, and of course we have friends and some of our young people who are a part of Norman High School, and some of you have probably heard about what happened because it hit national news, where one of the commentators used the N-word, and it was very offensive, and of course it brought a lot of more attention in a negative way one more time towards Norman. Well, what is it going to take for us to get to our tomorrow? That's another part of the shared vision piece. Shared vision means we're looking at the road and we recognize what it takes to get down this road. And I just want to say, it's great for people to come together and collaborate, because not only can we set vision, we can also be very real about what it takes to get to the vision and some of the potholes and some of the orange cones. We set those orange cones around the potholes so we can know when to slow down and drive slowly around this topic so that we can get to our destination in the best way possible. Let me start on the dream clock with hour one. Hour one is called self-locating. And in this hour, this is simply where we identify things that are familiar. You may have heard the term unconscious or implicit bias. We call it the palace. It's that us versus them. And the question is, who are you referring to when you say us and our? When you say us, does us include us? When you say our, does it include, when you say our children, does it include my children also? That's the big question. And so for all of us, whether we're part of the majority or the minority, according to the numbers, that's the big question. Who's your us and who is them? Because there's a negative philosophy behind the us-them that I believe hinders us from getting to where we want to go in our efforts for being collaborative, working together, and understanding one another in the process. So here's the us-them, the negative us-them narrative. It simply says this: the us's are good and the thems are bad. I mean, this is even true in sports. Choose the Cowboys or choose the Sooners, right? The us's have good intents and the thems have bad intents. So if it's one of us that does something wrong, then we've got a reason. You just don't understand them. You don't understand what they were trying to say. You didn't understand what they meant. If it's one of them, we're more likely to judge them by their actions and say, see, that proves to me what I've heard about them. So that's why we call the us world your palace. So if you picture a palace has thick walls. It's a place of safety and security, a place of protection. But when we merge the idea of palace and relationships, what we're actually talking about is the fact that when you're around your us world, your us group, that's the group where you can use less words and communicate more. You're not worried about being misunderstood. You're not worried about someone misinterpreting your actions. And you can start a sentence and they can probably finish it. You can start telling a joke and they can get it. You can start making an implication about something, and before you even finish your sentence, the us's can roll with you because they recognize all of what you're saying. Now that's totally different when you're around them. The thems is a totally different story. And when you're around them, it's easy for you to be misunderstood. It's easy for someone to misinterpret, and you find yourself trying to explain yourself a lot. Well, it's just natural that we would probably rather lean towards being in spaces where we're around us more than we're around them, because we're understood. We feel seen, we feel known, we feel welcomed in these spaces. What I love about the idea of bringing groups together is that we're intentionally getting out of our comfortable palaces so we can be around them and raise our ability to engage, to share thoughts, to understand, and to connect so that we can carry out vision together. I love that idea. We can beat the us-them narrative if we recognize where we're comfortable and then we're willing to be a little bit uncomfortable to see these dreams and these visions come to be a reality. So let me take you to 2 o'clock, because when we get to 2 o'clock, we're going to address some of the things that are mentioned when we talk about the palace, and that the potential of blind spots and the potential of following just our social laws that we practice between the us's and them's that we really don't think about all of the time. Well, 2 o'clock is called seeing others, because in our us world, that's oftentimes homogenous. And again, this is without blame. It's just simply saying that in America, a lot of times our us groups are people groups of the same ethnicity and people groups of the same wealth class. So if we know that's the case, now we can be intentional about building relationships across these divides and across these gaps. Yes, we had an ugly history in America, but we also get to recognize that just for all practical purposes, sometimes we don't even live side by side. We're not even in the same spaces. First step is just start seeing others. There's something called selective sight, and it's where we see the people that we're familiar with, and they could be sitting right next to someone that's a them, and we just kind of don't see them. So the question would be, how do you engage on a daily basis with those that don't look like you? So you just think about, wow, do I greet, do I engage those who don't look like me? And then how long are those conversations? And again, that's oftentimes based on comfort. So the challenge at 2 o'clock is simply to begin to identify the people who are right around you and begin to engage. And just start at step 1 is simple. Speak to someone that you usually overlook in your public spaces. Now, the dream clock is all about going after changes that we can practice on a daily basis, because then they translate into the works that we do. 3 o'clock is called showing up. How often do you frequent spaces where you're the minority, where you can experience other cultures? So the challenge at 3 o'clock is to find spaces where you can begin to be around other people groups. I know of an organization that was working in the Northeast community where instead of meeting in their offices, they always found a restaurant from the community where they could have their group meetings. It was just the factor of beginning to break down the gaps and the walls that are just natural spaces that have divided us just practically through distance. 4 o'clock is usually the big identifier. It's called coming to the table. 4 o'clock is simply asking one question: when was the last time that you had someone of a different ethnic group into your home to share a meal? Now I'm going to take you back just a little bit far in our history, not too far. I was born in '73, and some of these rules were still existing. I'm talking about sundown towns. Well, they had a sign out that said, "Get out, everybody of a different ethnic group." I found out that there were towns on both sides, but they said, if you're not Caucasian, you shouldn't be in the city past a certain time. Well, that's not going on anymore. But man, there's one more space that's usually just decently homogenous, and that's the dinner table. Well, you may say, I'm not comfortable inviting strangers or people that I don't know into my home. Well, meet somewhere in a mutual space or at a restaurant. But I want to invite you to invite someone who does not look like you into your home to share a meal. I believe, and we have seen, that when change starts to begin in our personal daily practices, they easily translate and help us to see how to build bridges in our organizations and in our public efforts. The last one I want to share with you is 5 o'clock, and that's called finding a guide. What resources do you have where you're hearing and learning from those outside of your palace world of us's? What a challenge. Think back to your favorite podcasts, your favorite talk shows, the history that you learned. Were the authors all of one ethnic group? Well, the challenge now is to listen to voices. We're not saying break your shared values, but find someone who has the same values and vision, but find a voice so that you can begin to grow in your cultural competence and we can build a better tomorrow together. Y'all, thank you for giving me this time to speak into the Joining Forces Conference. Just know that we're cheering for you and looking forward to seeing a more beautiful Oklahoma because of the works of the Oklahoma Family Network and others who share the same values just like us.